My name is Marian Hale, 64 years old, and I've lived in this house for almost half my life. I painted the kitchen walls butter yellow after my husband passed because the color felt like sunlight, something warm to sit inside when the world got cold. I thought that color would always mean home. Tonight, I learned that a house can forget who built it. The smell of pot roast drifted through the dining room, mixed with the chatter of my son's friends and the clinking of wine glasses. It was Ethan's 34th birthday. He looked handsome in the soft light from the chandelier, one his wife, Brianna, had ordered online without asking. She was standing at the head of the table, smiling that polished, hostess smile. I had carried out a tray of silverware, just trying to help the caterer set the table. That's when Brianna turned toward me, her voice calm and clear enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't invite you, Marian." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. The tray trembled in my hands. The caterer froze mid-step. My son's hand tightened around his wine glass, but he didn't say a word. I looked at the table. Oak wood I'd chosen 25 years ago when Ethan was still eating cereal from a plastic bowl. Every plate, every napkin folded on that table had once been mine. "I didn't invite you," she repeated, softer this time, like she was explaining something to a child. The laughter in the room flattened into silence. I set the tray down slowly, afraid the clatter might betray how hard my heart was pounding. "Of course," I said, though my voice barely found air. "Wouldn't want to ruin the picture." Then I stepped back, watching Brianna lean toward Ethan and whisper something I couldn't hear. I didn't ask. I just walked away, past the hall where my husband's photograph hung crooked, past the kitchen that smelled too much like effort and too little like love. Outside on the porch, the night air tasted of rain. I told myself it was just weather, but part of me already knew something far bigger had shifted inside that house. When Ethan first asked if he and Brianna could stay just a few months, it didn't sound like a threat. He'd lost his apartment after the heating system broke down that winter, and rent in Brookvale had climbed to numbers that would make anyone blush. I remember telling him, "Of course, honey. This is your home too." At first, it even felt good to have life in the house again. The sound of Noah's tiny feet on the hardwood floors, the cartoons playing too loud from the living room. It filled the quiet that had hung around since my husband passed. I didn't notice the shift right away. It started small, the way most takeovers do. Brianna asked if she could freshen up the guest room. 2 days later, the old floral curtains were gone, replaced by gray linen that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. She was efficient, I'll give her that. Then she replaced my dining chairs. "Too dated," she said, and boxed them up for donation before I had time to blink. One evening, I came home from the community center to find my rocking chair missing. The walnut one, my husband, Frank, had sanded by hand. It had been in the corner of the living room since before Ethan was born. I found it later, shoved into the garage beside a pile of unopened Amazon boxes. Brianna laughed it off. "Oh, that old thing didn't fit the modern vibe." I didn't argue. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary had a way of stretching, though, like a rubber band around my chest. The kitchen, once my refuge, slowly changed, too. Brianna didn't like the butter yellow paint, said it clashed with her cookware. "A cool tone would photograph better," she explained. Photograph. She ran an Instagram account for home design tips. One afternoon, I caught her filming a before and after video, calling my kitchen a fixer-upper. Ruth, my next-door neighbor, dropped by that same week with an apple pie and a raised eyebrow. "You sure this is still your house, hun?" she asked, her eyes scanning the new light fixtures. I laughed it off, but something inside me started to ache. Brianna had a talent for turning small things into statements. She switched the plates to square ones, rearranged the spice rack alphabetically, and moved my family photo from the mantel to a hallway corner for better symmetry. She said it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ethan stayed neutral, the way some men do when they think silence keeps the peace. She just wants the place to feel nice. Mom, he'd say, kissing my cheek on the way out. But nice started to look more and more like hers, not ours. The final straw before the birthday dinner came one Friday evening. I walked into the living room, and there it was, a new chandelier hanging from the ceiling, glittering like something out of a hotel lobby. A delivery van idled out front, the receipt taped to the box on the floor. "Surprise," Brianna said, wiping dust from her hands. "It's an early gift for Ethan's party next week. Makes the room brighter." "It's lovely," I said, though my stomach twisted. "How much did it cost?" "Oh, don't worry," she said lightly. "Ethan used his card." That was the moment I realized it wasn't just my furniture disappearing. It was my authority, softly peeled away, piece by piece, replaced with her polished taste and my own silence. That night, I sat on the back porch, the only space that still felt mine. The air smelled like rain and grass. I could hear Noah laughing inside, his voice bouncing off the walls that no longer belonged to me. Ruth called from her yard, voice cutting through the twilight. "You all right, Marian?" I smiled across the fence, pretending. "Just thinking," I said. She nodded. "Thinking's fine. Just don't let it turn into waiting." Her words landed like a stone in my chest. I didn't know it then, but I was already waiting for something to snap, for that one small moment when pretending would no longer hold, and it came. Soon enough, with a tray of silverware and 7 little words that burned through everything I'd ever built. The night of Ethan's birthday started with laughter. Brianna had been buzzing around the house all day, directing the caterers, adjusting the centerpiece, and correcting anyone who moved a plate half an inch off center. I'd tried to stay out of her way, but my hands itched to help. Old habits die hard. By 6 o'clock, the living room smelled like rosemary and roast beef. Candles flickered on the new chandelier, throwing sharp light over the table I'd chosen decades ago. The house was full. Ethan's coworkers, Brianna's friends, people I barely knew but smiled at anyway. For a moment, I felt proud. Maybe this night would go smoothly after all. Then came the moment that carved itself into me. I was carrying a tray of polished silverware to the table, just as the caterer reached for it. Brianna turned, her voice smooth and cold. "I didn't invite you. Marian." The words landed with the weight of a hammer. The tray shook in my hands. The room fell quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge in the background. Ethan looked down at his glass, the stem between his fingers turning red from the wine. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. The guests shifted uncomfortably, one of them clearing his throat. I set the tray down as carefully as I could and forced a smile that didn't belong to me. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't want to interrupt the party." Brianna gave me a tight, polite smile, victory disguised as manners. Then she turned back to her guests, her voice bright again. "All right, everyone, let's eat before the pot roast gets cold." The chatter resumed, thinner this time, as if the air itself had lost confidence. I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard it blurred the edges of the room. From the doorway, I watched her lean close to Ethan, whispering something that made him nod without meeting her eyes. He looked like a man trying to keep a tent from collapsing while pretending there's no storm. I could have stayed and fought for my place at that table, but I didn't. Pride, exhaustion, maybe both, held me still. I walked out to the porch, the night air cool against my face. Through the window, I could see the chandelier gleaming above them, bright and foreign, like it belonged to someone else's home. I sat on the steps, wrapping my sweater tighter. The laughter inside grew softer, muffled by walls that no longer felt like mine. A few minutes later, the screen door creaked open. Ruth's voice cut through the quiet. "You planning to stay out here all night?" I hadn't heard her car pull up, but there she was, pie tin in one hand, a concerned squint in her eyes. "Didn't expect company," I said. "You looked like you needed one." She sat beside me, passing the pie over. Apple, still warm. Comfort food for the soul. I laughed weakly. What soul? The one that's still sitting here instead of throwing them out, she said, dry as ever. Then her tone softened. "Marian, you can't let them treat you like a guest in your own home. You built this place." Her words struck something raw. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that family meant bending, being patient, letting the younger ones make mistakes. But the truth was heavier than excuses. "I don't even know when it stopped being mine," I said quietly. Ruth sighed. "It stops being yours the minute you stop saying no." I stared into the yard, where the porch light carved long shadows across the grass. Noah's laughter floated through the window, bright and oblivious. Ruth stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Call Lydia," she said. "That lawyer I told you about. Sometimes respect needs paperwork." As she left, I stayed there in the dark, pie cooling on my lap, wondering how something so warm could suddenly taste like ash. Inside, a cheer went up as Brianna brought out the birthday cake. I didn't need to look. I could already imagine her voice cutting through the clinking glasses, clear, confident, and utterly certain that I didn't belong. That night, I decided I wouldn't let her be right. The morning after the party, the house felt heavier. The dishes were washed, the decorations gone, yet the silence lingered like smoke. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one Brianna had hidden behind the new glass set, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the butter-yellow wall she'd once called too cheerful. That was when I remembered Ruth's words from the night before. Sometimes respect needs paperwork. By noon, I was sitting in a tidy office downtown with a woman named Lydia Park. She was in her 40s, calm, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who didn't waste words. I told her everything, from the temporary stay to the chandelier to the humiliation over dinner. Lydia listened without interruption, jotting notes with a fountain pen. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "You have full ownership of the property, correct?" "Yes. The mortgage was paid off 7 years ago," I said. She nodded. "Then you decide who stays under that roof, not them." It sounded so simple, yet the weight of it made my throat tighten. I'd spent months trying to keep peace, but peace had turned into surrender. Lydia explained what she could help me with, formalizing house rules, setting boundaries that were legal, not just emotional. That evening, I typed them up myself. It felt oddly satisfying, like reclaiming a language I hadn't spoken in years. 3 clear rules. 1. Any household changes require my written approval. 2. No parties or gatherings without the homeowner present. 3. This house is not for sale or transfer without my consent. I printed them, signed my name, and taped the paper to the refrigerator door. When Brianna came home, her heels clicking across the tile, she stopped short at the sight of it. "What's this?" she asked, her voice flat. "House rules," I said, keeping my tone even. "Just to make sure we're all on the same page." She laughed softly, a sound more mocking than amused. "Marian, you don't need to make this so formal. We're family." "Exactly," I said. And family respects each other's space. Ethan walked in just then, tired from work, and scanned the list. "Is this really necessary?" he asked, rubbing the back of his neck. "Necessary?" I said quietly. "After last night, I think it's overdue." Brianna crossed her arms. "If this place makes you that unhappy, maybe we can just buy it from you. It's old, anyway. You could use the money for retirement." I met her gaze, steady and cold. "This house isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Her expression hardened. "You're being unreasonable." "Maybe," I said, "but I've earned that right." The silence that followed stretched thin. Noah's footsteps echoed down the hallway, his little voice asking for a bedtime story. Ethan excused himself to tuck him in, leaving Brianna and me standing there in the kitchen, the butter-yellow walls between us like a battle line. She finally said, "You can't hold on to everything forever. Marian." I smiled faintly. "That's true, but I can hold on to what's mine." Brianna turned and walked away without another word. The sound of her heels faded down the hall, leaving only the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat. That night, I sat in my restored reading nook, the rocking chair back in its corner where it belonged. I ran my fingers along the worn armrest, remembering the nights Frank had read bedtime stories to Ethan right there. The rhythm of the creek beneath me felt like an old heartbeat returning. Outside. The porch light glowed against the glass, soft and steady. I realized I hadn't felt this calm in months. Setting those rules hadn't just redrawn boundaries in the house, it had redrawn them inside me. Still, a quiet unease stirred beneath the peace. People like Brianna didn't surrender easily. As I rocked in the dim light, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was already planning her next move. And I was right. It happened a week later, on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of blue sky day that looks peaceful until it isn't. I was at the Brookvale Senior Center shaping a lump of clay into something that almost resembled a mug when my phone started to buzz. Ruth's name flashed on the screen. "Marian," she said, skipping any greeting. "There's a strange car in your driveway. Some guy in a blazer's walking around your yard with a clipboard." My stomach dropped. "What kind of car?" "Silver SUV. Says Elm and Key Realty on the side. You expecting a sale I don't know about?" I didn't answer. The clay slipped from my hands, hitting the table with a dull thud. "I'll be right there." When I turned the corner onto Maple Drive 15 minutes later, my front gate was open. A man in khakis and shiny shoes was snapping photos of my porch while Brianna stood nearby, pointing out details like she was leading a tour. Ethan's truck wasn't in the driveway. He was still at work. I parked by the curb, stepped out, and called. "Can I help you?" The man startled, lowering his camera. "Oh, Mrs. Hale, right? I'm Tucker Pritchard with Elm and Key Realty. We're just, taking preliminary photos for the listing." "The listing?" I repeated, my voice too calm to match the pulse in my neck. "And who exactly authorized this listing?" Brianna turned, her smile tight. "I did. We're getting the house appraised. Ethan and I talked about it." "That's interesting," I said, "because the last time I checked, my name was the only one on the deed." Tucker glanced between us like a man who just realized he'd walked into the wrong movie. "I, was told this was a joint sale. If that's not the case, I can—" "It's not," I said, pulling a folded paper from my purse, the copy of my title deed that Lydia had insisted I keep. I handed it to him. "You might want to verify before taking any more pictures." He scanned the document, his face reddening. "Right. Understood. I'll, delete those immediately." He fumbled with his camera, mumbling an apology before hurrying toward his SUV. When the car disappeared down the street, I turned to Brianna. "You invited a realtor to my home without asking?" She didn't flinch. We were just trying to help you. Marian, this house is too big for you alone. You'd be more comfortable somewhere smaller. This place needs a family." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "This is a family, or it was supposed to be." She crossed her arms. "You're standing in the way of our future." I'm standing in my own living room. Something flickered in her eyes. Anger. Maybe fear. "You're being selfish," she said. "You don't even need this house." "We do." "Need?" I repeated, feeling heat rise in my chest. "You don't need my house. Brianna, you need boundaries." Her lips parted like she might argue, but just then, Ethan's truck rumbled up the street. He climbed out, confusion spreading across his face as he saw us standing on the lawn. "What's going on?" "Your wife invited a realtor to sell my house," I said. Ethan's shoulders slumped. "Brianna, please tell me that's not true." "She's being unreasonable," Brianna shot back. "This place could sell for $600,000 easily. We could pay off your card debt and—" "Debt?" I turned to Ethan. "What debt?" He rubbed his forehead. "It's nothing. Just the new furniture, the light fixtures. Brianna wanted to—" I held up a hand. "Stop. You used your card to furnish a house you don't own?" He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I just wanted her to be happy." I felt something break and settle all at once. "Then maybe she should find happiness somewhere else." Brianna stared at me, jaw tight, eyes cold. "You can't just kick us out." "I can," I said quietly, "and I will." That evening, Lydia faxed over a 30-day notice to vacate, perfectly legal under Illinois housing law. Ethan accepted it wordlessly. Brianna crumpled her copy and stormed off to their room. As the house went silent again, I sat in my rocking chair, hands trembling not from fear, but from the release of it. For the first time in months, the walls seemed to breathe with me instead of against me. I watched the sun dip low across the butter-yellow kitchen and thought, sometimes peace doesn't arrive gently. It comes after you've locked the door. 3 weeks later, the house was quiet again, almost too quiet. The spare rooms stood empty, the scent of Brianna's perfume finally fading from the curtains. The silence felt cleaner somehow, like the air after a storm. Ethan stayed the full 30 days. He didn't argue, didn't beg. He packed boxes in the evenings while Noah colored at the kitchen table. I cooked simple meals, small enough for 2, and we ate in uneasy peace. Some nights, he'd glance at me as if searching for the words to bridge what had cracked between us. I let the silence do the work. When the moving truck finally left the driveway, I sat on the porch steps, coffee in hand, watching the tire tracks fade in the dust. For the first time in a long time, I felt the house breathe. It wasn't anger anymore, just space, clean and honest. 2 months passed before I saw them again. It was early autumn, the maple in the yard already shedding red leaves when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, holding Noah in one arm and a folded piece of paper in the other. His eyes were tired, but softer somehow. "She left," he said quietly. "Brianna moved back to her mother's. She's filing for separation." I looked at Noah, his small hand clutching a toy fire truck, his eyes wide but calm. "You both okay?" I asked. He nodded, trying to be... I need a little help with Noah while I work. I stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. "Then let's set some ground rules." He blinked, almost smiling through the guilt. "Rules?" "Yes," I said. 3 afternoons a week. I'll watch Noah here while you work. You'll pick him up by 7, and no sleeping over unless you call first. Understood?" He nodded, relief and shame tangled together. Understood. Later, when Noah sat at the table drawing, I wiped the counters. listening to his soft humming. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive. That evening, as the last light stretched across the butter-yellow walls, I placed my husband's photograph back above the fireplace. The old rocking chair creaked beneath me, steady and familiar. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't forgetting. It's setting rules so love can live without bruising. Outside, the maple rustled in the wind, whispering like it finally remembered my name.